Greetings from GradeGrid.com. Today I'd like to show you how to create a simple gradebook using Microsoft Excel. If you look at my screen, you can see what the gradebook will actually look like that we're going to be creating today. Let's start by creating a new workbook in Excel. Now that we have a new workbook, let's add a few headers. First one we want to add, we'll call student name. Then let's add a few headers for specific grades. Obviously, in a real scenario, you'd probably add something more descriptive than just grade 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, but for this example, this will suffice. After we've added these grade columns, we also want to add a header for the total grades. After we've added each of the specific grade headers, we'll also want to add a header for calculating our final average. Once we're finished with all our headers, let's add a little formatting so that they'll stand out from the rest of the cells. This is easiest to do by just selecting the group of cells that you want to change the format on. If you right-click, there's an option to format cells. And in here we have a number of tabs of different things that we can do to these cells. In our case, we want to change the font style here. We're going to change it to bold. And we also want to change the pattern because that's what's going to affect the background color. So in my case, I'm just going to use a shade of blue. Once we've made all the changes that we want to make to these cells, you hit OK. And as you can see, we've now changed all of our headers to have a bold font as well as having a blue background. You may notice that not all of our headers are completely visible. One easy thing to fix this is to click into this top corner square and then just pick one of the borders in between a column and double click. This will resize all of the columns to the maximum width of anything that's in any of their cells. So if we had any sort of content down here that was even wider than this, it would have actually made the column a little bit wider so that you can see all of the contents. The next thing I'd like to do is to define the boundaries of our gradebook. This is something that can be done easily again by selecting a group of cells. Right-click, Format Cells. In this case, I'd like to do an outline, which that's actually going to put a border around the outside of the cells that I selected. But I'd also like to have a dividing line in between each of the rows and columns. So I'm going to use this inside option, which is also going to fill that in. If we hit OK, you'll notice that now we have cell borders around each of the cells, as well as there's this boundary around the entire gradebook. At this point, we're ready to begin putting data into our gradebook. Now, you'd have the option of just putting in the student names, grades, and then calculating the averages on, say, a calculator or on paper, and then just filling them in manually. Now, since we're using Excel, that would be kind of silly because Excel is able to do calculations for us. In order to allow Excel to do averages for us, we're going to need to use one of Excel's built-in functions. In order to do this, we want to click on the cell that we're going to add our function to. Click on this FX button, which will say Insert Function if you hover over it. When you click on it, we'll get a pop-up window that basically gives us a list of functions that we can use. The ones that we're interested in are under Statistical, and the specific function that we want is called Average. Now we hit OK. We now see a list of text boxes that ask for numbers that you're wanting to do an average of. You have the option of putting in various values here and it will average them together, but in our case we actually want to select a group of cells. So while still clicked in this number 1 text box, I'm actually going to pick the cells that I want to do the average of. In this case, since we're doing this row 2, that's where we're doing our function, we want to actually average all of the cells that are in that same row. So I highlighted all of those cells. You'll see that it gives a B2 colon F2, which is just Excel's way of saying, hey, I want to do an average of this group of cells. Once that's done, click OK. and we've now added our function. If you're following this tutorial in order, you may notice that there's this sort of strange error message here that says div/0. This is basically saying that we got a divide by 0 error, and that's just because we don't have any values in these fields yet. So once we start adding grades in a little bit here, we'll actually see this value change to what the average of our grades are that we have in the gradebook. Before we do that, we want to copy our new function into all of the cells that we want to calculate an average. My favorite way to do this is to select the cell, and then if you hover over the bottom right corner, you'll notice that the cursor changes into a sort of bold plus sign. If you left click on that bottom corner and drag down and then let go, you'll notice that these change their value. Excel will actually copy a relative function, which just means that this function was copied here and is now going to do the average of this row, and when it was copied here, it's now going to do the average of this row. So the end result is that we have 3 fields that are all calculating an average of the row that these fields are contained in. Now we're getting to the fun part where we actually get to see our formulas at work. So let's start by putting in a few student names. We'll just make some up. Next, we'll start actually putting grades in for these students. You notice the first grade that we put in caused the divide by 0 error to go away, because now we actually have values for the average. In this case, I've only added 1 grade, so of course the final average is equal to the grade. But let's add in a few more to see how our average continues to do the work for us. Notice again that it changes to the average of those 2 grades. If we add a third, it's averaging the 3. Same with a 4th and a 5th grade. So now for this student, we know that their total cumulative average out of all these grades given is 88.2. We'll go ahead and fill in the remaining grades just to show that our formulas are working for all of our rows. So again, we'll just add some makeup grades here. As you can see, we have a different average in each of these rows that corresponds to the average of the grades for that student. That's pretty much it. If you want, you can also format these average cells to look differently than the rest of the cells. So again, we'll click on Format Cells, Patterns, and maybe give it a dark background color, which if you do, it's probably a good idea to also give the font a lighter color. So we'll change this to something like a white font instead of black. And you'll see that now these cells actually stand out from the rest of these, that you can just, identify them as your averages. This concludes our lesson on building a gradebook in Microsoft Excel. I hope this makes grading somehow easier for you. Please visit us at GradeGrid.com and check out our simple grading software for teachers.